Hi, this is Cameron Murray, and I'm going to be recording my learning walk for the unit that I created for my online class, which was German 1. Um, it is a class that I designed to be mostly asynchronous. It's possible that there would be synchronous meetings and so on. Part of the reason that I did that was because I wanted to create a class where students who felt that the video lessons that were pre-recorded or even just text that they could read to learn about a concept. I wanted those students to be able to move on and not have to maybe sit through what we would consider maybe the typical lecture style of teaching. But if a student needed that or wanted that, or I saw the need for the student to meet with me to learn a certain concept, then that would also be possible. Um, Still building community, so I have activities such as some of these weren't posted yet just because of the amount that I covered or had students work through in class. Um, but I did have students, for example, here using a discussion board to talk about concepts and kind of build community that way. Um, and there are other opportunities for that as well, but that's just one example. So, going back to the stream here, just to give you an idea of what my class kind of looked like, or my classroom looked like. So I had a basic introduction here talking about the unit. This is beneath that, this is it's actually the discussion board essentially that they would be using. So it's already posted there on the stream. Under the classwork, I have each lesson. So the introduction, my contact here, the pre-assessment that students filled out, and then lesson 1, lesson 2, 3, 4, and finally at the bottom, we have the chapter project, which is more of it's not, I guess, technically part of the unit, but it would have come after this section of the unit, or the entire chapter. And then finally at the bottom I have resources, so this includes the learning targets, academic integrity information, technology expectations and netiquette, and then technology assistance. Now, in terms of the SEL strategies that I employed, so for example, one of the main focuses here, I would say, is basically managing stress and sort of that self-awareness aspect, but then opening that up to, um, talking to other students and kind of learning how they manage their stress and cope with things was part of my main focus just because it fit nicely with the current content in this unit. But it's also something that I think is really valuable, and students need to be able to manage stress. And that's, really a life skill. So here you'll see that I incorporated that idea with the actual German activity. So what do you do when you have a lot of stress or with a lot of stress? And then even asking the question, what do you do in the winter with a lot of stress? Because sometimes what we like to do to relieve stress in the summer or in the spring or in the fall is different. If, maybe you like to run to relieve stress, and when it's snowing out, maybe that's not possible, or you just don't like to run in the cold or whatever. So I kind of opened that up, and then was I had the intent of, allowing them to discuss that and share with each other how they each relieve stress in certain circumstances or whatever that might be. Um, all of it had to do with the current vocabulary, and I thought it tied together nicely. Um, and like I said, there are other concepts. That's really the main one. But social awareness and self-awareness, I think, are big ones that I cover in this unit. Um, the next topic is the standards. So if we take a look at um, the national standards for quality online teaching, Standard A is maybe a little bit harder in some ways to see in the online classroom. I think it's most evident in the resource section. So, providing the expectations, the netiquette, academic integrity, technology assistance, and so on is kind of, I think, where it's easiest to see that. Um, it's something that might show up more as I'm teaching and interacting with students as well. So, having not gotten through the entire unit just due to lack of time in working with German, it was more difficult. It was more of a challenge, I should say, to find people who knew German enough to complete the unit. So I did have to end up going to my actual students to do that. But that standard specifically, like I said, I think is most evident, at least at this point in time, in this unit, in the resources section. In terms of standard B, digital pedagogy, tools and things that I'm using, specific things that would benefit the students depending on what they're learning. I think I also have evidence of that here. So one example would be the Flipgrid assignment. Students are practicing pronunciation. Well, a great tool to allow them to record themselves and so that I can provide feedback and so on would be Flipgrid, where they can record the video and then I can respond in video and provide the correct pronunciation if they had errors, or just provide feedback in general. In terms of standard C, community building, I kind of mentioned this already. So under the discussion board, this is one example of community building. The students get to discuss with each other and share kind of what helps them get through stress and so on. Another way would be here. So I have them creating a short survey and then they're sharing that out, getting the information back, and then they have to basically, the assignment was to retell what someone else said. So learning about each other's interests and things like that, incorporated throughout. As the unit went on, things got a little bit more complex. So earlier on, it might be less frequent, just because the tasks are a little bit less challenging. So incorporating that with German learning was a little bit different. All right, standard D, learner engagement. So this standard, I would say, can also be a little bit tricky to see throughout the entire unit, but using tools to identify patterns in learner engagement and performance that will inform improvements to achieve individual learner growth, and allowing learner customized pace, and also the provision of resources and so on, I think is evident. So if we look at obviously the resource section, that is where I've provided resources for them for technology assistance and so on. Like I said earlier, the pace is a little bit more open, which is something that I prefer, where students can kind of work ahead and where they feel comfortable. The setup is basically so that students can work through it, and they might have to revisit. For example, the Flipgrid pronunciation videos say that they should provide feedback to peers. So if they finish that early and no one else has recorded, then they can always come back to that. I did have 2 lessons open at once, and as I see students moving through, that could open new lessons. And then let me go back, I forgot what I was about to say. identifying patterns in learner engagement and performance that will inform improvements. So obviously, I have these assessments, lesson reflections, um, and I think it will allow me to kind of reflect on that and improve um, units in the future or even lessons and whatnot to help students achieve more. Um, and the tools that like I mentioned before, the tools that I use are relevant and helpful in matching to what the actual task is. For standard E, digital citizenship, I'm going to again go back to the resources and point out that here I have the netiquette, the technology expectations. Anytime I have an assignment where it involves writing and um, student production of their own work, I often now, and even in this online course, would be saying things like, make sure that you check for plagiarism, cite your sources, that sort of stuff. Now, I don't know that I really have any activities like that in this section per se. Um, and so that's something that, I could improve on perhaps in the future if I find that I'm missing something. But I think every activity in this section of the unit is not necessarily requiring that I include that sort of stuff. But the expectations and so on are down here, and I think I also meet that standard. Standard F, diverse instruction. This is something that I think is evident more so maybe with the assessment types, which I do have variety here. I also feel like I have variety in activities. So, for example, I have this activity where students are just reading sentences and analyzing them. So, looking at the sentences that are here and deciding what's different about them, what happens when I put a prepositional phrase at the front of the sentence, and kind of examining them, trying to figure out what's going on, versus identifying mistakes, where they see sentences that have errors in them and have to identify the error and then try to correct it. I have translations. I have the survey that I mentioned earlier. And then the vocabulary practice, pronunciation videos. I feel like there is a lot of diversity in terms of the actual activities, and I have videos to instruct them. And so I think it does address a variety of learning modes. Standard G is for assessment and measurement, and I know I already touched a little bit on assessment. However, the types of assessments that I'm using I think are also diverse. For example, the vocabulary mini assessment is actually a crossword that students would complete. So you can see that there, and then it's for the vocabulary. So they would fill in the vocabulary words. I also have the quiz, so that is a Google form quiz. The discussion board, so there's variety in the assessment, and in most of the assessments, the ones that will count as more of the summative assessments, that there's definitely a way to ensure that it is the actual students and they're maintaining academic integrity and so on. Standard H. So in terms of the actual design, this is basically, I guess, what I've been covering the whole time to some degree, but I did, as I've been mentioning here, I tried to incorporate variety in the activities, variety in the instruction, and I think I did so successfully